It was not a film rooted in a kind of Paddy Chayefsky realism, I think it's safe to say.
It reminds me of some Salvador Dali version of Los Angeles because it's that surreal.
There's something excessive about the movie that gets you into a place of giddiness. It's like a drug.
It was bigger than I'd ever even imagined with roller skating. It was so weird. It was so out there.
It wasn't very well received.
I was living in Santa Monica or the Palisades, and as a writer, producer, and a friend kept bugging me about doing a story on what had started as a small little thing at Venice Beach and just kept growing and growing, which was roller skating.
Xanadu was made to take advantage of the roller disco craze that was going through the country and the movie business.
I had a couple of friends who lived in Venice. One was an artist who painted the album replicas that you saw at Tower Records. And the other one was a roadie, and he had a crush on a major rock star's girlfriend. I sort of worked out a story that would take place in Venice that had a little bit to do with roller skating, but mainly the lifestyle in Venice Beach. The friend was Brian Grazer. I think he's emerged a little bit bigger than the assistant that he was then. I built the storyline to go toward a big rock club at the end, which I called Xanadu. And I took it, yes, both after the house that Orson Welles named in Citizen Kane, and of course he took it from the Coleridge poem.
In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree.
We took it to the creative assistant for Larry Gordon, who happened to be Joel Silver. So I was locked in a small room with Brian Grazer and Joel Silver. I lived to tell the tale. And we worked out a storyline and took it to their boss, which was Larry Gordon.
I really sold it to the studio as a very low budget, no star, tiny, small roller disco movie. We looked around and had to beat out two other movies that were going at the same time, but we were kind of thrown off our game plan because Olivia Newton-John became interested and agreed to do the movie, and that upped the ante. So we still had basically the same start date, but now we were making a much bigger movie with bigger stakes, bigger budget, everything else, and we still had to move very fast.
I got a call from Larry Gordon to come in for a meeting and went to Universal, and Larry said, good news, bad news. Good news is I think we're going to make this movie. Bad news is you're being rewritten.
I met with Larry Gordon, the producer, and he asked me what I'd like to do with it, and so I would see what comes up. So I worked with Joel Silver, who was also an associate producer on the film, and he and I went to his apartment every day, and we battered the story around, and we came up with an idea of doing a fantasy.
I remember very clearly getting this script. It was like 45 pages. It was very weak, to be polite about it. And I said, oh, well, I guess they're going to fix it.
Universal called me back and threw the thing at me and said, we want you to rewrite it. So now I have an original script, I'm rewritten. I have another script, and I'm rewritten. He did it one more time, maybe two more times.
Well, lo and behold, the script never got fixed. Became longer than 45 pages, but it never got fixed, even though there were many writers working on it at many different hours of the day and night and weeks and months.
We looked around, and Robert Greenwald was preparing another small roller disco film, and we hired him to come in and direct the movie because we knew we'd have a jump on everybody else.
Larry and Joel and I would have conversations, often yelling. For myself, there was always frustration that we really never had a script, and we never solved a script. My solution was to dream up the most interesting, magical musical numbers. Joel got Electric Light Orchestra to come and do the music, so that gave us a big step up. The effort behind the movie was really to sort of touch the culture with the whole roller skating, which was breaking out at that point. People were doing it more, they were dancing to it, and to try to tap into that. Then part of it was to do a great, good old-fashioned musical, only brought up to date. Olivia was cast very early on.
She was absolutely perfect. Not just that, she was a big name and a wonderful talent and musically terrific. The night that Gene Kelly committed to do the movie, we were at his house, and after a long meeting and a lot of begging and pleading and pitching, Gene finally said, okay, I'll do the movie, and shook hands and As we were leaving, just as I got to the door, he said, "But I won't dance."
Suddenly I get this phone call, you know, not only are you choreographing this roller skating movie, but now Olivia's in it. And then you need to come down to the studio. You're meeting Gene Kelly. He's not going to dance in the movie, but he won't do the movie if he doesn't like you. And I was like, what? Gene Kelly shows up in a chauffeur-driven car and comes walking right in. "Gentlemen, out of the way. Where's Mr. Ortega?" You know, we went into a room, locked the door, and Gene says to me, "I'm not dancing in the film." And he goes, "But if I was going to dance in the film, what would you have me do?" And I wasn't prepared for that. However, I was a huge fan of Gene Kelly. And I said, "Well, I'd probably just go to your own vocabulary. I'd go right to, you know, what it is that you made great." And he said, "Like what?" And I remembered some of the steps from some of the films, and I started doing them. And as I started doing them, he started naming them. "That's the old Nora Bays." And he got up on his feet, and he started to do them with me, and we started to put a little combination together. We actually cracked a sweat. About a half an hour later, he stopped, shook my hand, opened up the door, walked out, and looked at Joel and Larry, who almost fell through the door, and said, "I'll do the picture."
There is nobody like Gene Kelly. Clearly, Joel and Larry are incredibly persuasive, and they did a great job in bringing him to the table.
Gene thought the concept was marvelous. I mean, it was this wonderful blending of the old-fashioned musical with pure fantasy, and he thought it would work, but it didn't work. It just didn't come off, he said, ultimately.
Gene was a superb actor, superb professional, danced like crazy.
Obviously, one of the nicest things to come out of it was Gene's working with Olivia Newton-John, and I think it was kind of a mutual, not only mutual admiration society, I think it was a mutual affection.
I went to bed one night thinking I was doing a roller skating disco movie and woke up with the biggest female star in music, and then suddenly the icon of motion picture musicals, and truly going, you know, I don't know how to do this.
Dancers are a unique and wonderful breed, right, as we know. The big musicals don't come along that often.
The best part was finding all of that remarkable talent that had very few places to take it. Movie musicals were a thing of the past, and suddenly there was a generation of dancers out there that were ready to breathe whole new life into dance.
I was muse number 6, so you know at the very beginning, the wall where the girls come out, and I was one of the muses. And I actually got a little acting bit, and I was so ecstatic because I got to say a word, which was, "Sure."
All right, listen, I gotta borrow this. I'll bring it back.
Sure. So at least I got to say a word.
It was a very pretty group of people, and it was racially very diverse, which I think makes it so much more interesting.
It provided a creative plus to the way it looked, to the way it felt, to the vitality.
That was very progressive, very diverse, and it really reflected Los Angeles in its truest form.
The finding of so many other awesome kids that went on to become some of the most important people in dance in our community, in our industry. You know, Chain Reaction. Rocio Garcia, who's in the Guinness Book of World Records. Truly, we've got the greatest agents working in Hollywood today for dance that were my dancers in Xanadu, Tony Selznick, and actors like Albie Selznick. It was jam-packed with a tremendous amount of local talent, many that went on to have illustrious careers.
Kenny Ortega was brought into the film. He's a wonderful guy and a terrific choreographer, and he did a fantastic job under tremendous pressure.
Kenny Ortega was able to pull all sorts of characters. There was tightrope walkers and jugglers coming in because he was friends with them and knew them.
He asked like all these people I knew, you know, to be in it, and I was feeling like bad, you know, like how come I can't be in it? And then he called me one day and he's like, "I want you to tightrope walk in the finale of Xanadu," and I was like, oh my God.
When we were asked to do the movie, Kenny Ortega was our choreographer. He started with the tubes and kind of directed and choreographed the tubes from the early days. I'm sure without Kenny's involvement, we would have never had anything to do with Xanadu.
So, you know, you're getting three different kinds of choreographers, and Kenny and Russell working together was a great blend.
Russell Clark was truly a choreographic partner in the making of Xanadu. And you really see a lot of him. He's really impacted the best of the work that we did.
We wanted to incorporate Los Angeles, and yet we wanted to give it a certain kind of look. So we spent a good deal of time in terms of location scouting and looking.
Unfortunately, a lot of the unusual locations used in Xanadu are gone. They've been destroyed, and one was the Ferrucci Boutique was the first movie theater in Beverly Hills, and it's been torn down. And the Pan Pacific building, the famous Deco building, is gone. And so you see kind of glorious hints of the old history of Los Angeles and Beverly Hills.
I felt strongly that the Deco look had great strengths, obviously, and we should incorporate it, but I didn't want it to just stay there.
It's so indefinable. It isn't part of any mood or trend, but it was a caricature of the look of the eras.
Bobby Mannix was wonderful, and we really got to wear some great costumes. The tiger stripe and everything was so coordinated, and just, we looked great.
She's a magician when it comes to clothing, and her ideas were wonderful, and she had a huge amount of people to costume.
We just about made everything. We had a huge dance troupe to build clothes for. So it was a big made-to-order movie.
Everything that you saw on the movie was happening in the clubs. I remember wearing zoot suit pants, and then I'd wear some really new, funky shirt from Fiorucci's to blend it all. So when we went to wardrobe, I thought that was just normal. Looking back, it definitely was not normal, but that was what we were wearing.
She could create something from nothing. You know, look at a room and go, okay, I can take that, that, and that, and we got a costume. You know, we got a look. That looks great on you.
The muses were easy because you take Greek mythology and the muses, and you put a name to every one of them. And what I do is color everybody differently, and they always consistently stayed in those colors.
The fun part about the 80s were the leg warmers.
We brought that into the early 80s, the spandex and the leg warmers and everything, as a result of Xanadu. They looked fabulous, especially like in the finale, and then they caught on like wildfire after that, and leg warmers were the thing.
I wore a brown and red three-piece zoot suit that totally looked ridiculous in person. The outfits in checks, and I have a striped shirt and polka-dotted tie. And I went to the costumer, I said, this isn't gonna work, what are you doing? She says, kid, trust me, it'll look great.
The key number with Jean and Olivia, Whenever You're Away From Me, was actually shot after the movie had wrapped. The movie had closed, and they took it out. It was a kind of a big press junket, and what everyone wanted was not in the movie, which was a number with Jean and Olivia. And so the producers were pretty desperate to get that, and Jean had already terminated. His contract was over, and he didn't want to come back to do it. And finally, he agreed to come back, but only on one condition. He said he would come back so long as it was shot on a closed soundstage, and only Jean, the camera operator, the director of photography, Olivia, and Kenny Ortega would be present, and no one else would be able to participate. There could be no other intrusion.
Gene Kelly and I worked together on that film, and he decided to become my mentor. It was his choice. And he put his viewfinder around my neck from Singing in the Rain with his name inscribed on it, and a stopwatch in my pocket, and he took me to his house, and he broke down all of his films, and he taught me his art of designing choreography for the camera, and became my mentor, my teacher, my friend for the next 23 years until his passing.
When you look at the number, it's very Jean, and you can see that Jean was completely in control of that. And it's distinct. The mannerisms are very Jean-like, the way that he gets up and walks across the room. It's a man walking terribly gracefully across the floor. And when Jean choreographed a number like that, he would always choreograph it for the woman. So this was perfectly created to kind of celebrate what Olivia's capabilities were. But I think it's very charming the way that it's very simply constructed. It's a very simple number, which is often a harder number to construct.
We were talking about film and language and relationship between camera and dance and designing choreography for the lens, and you design a piece of choreography up to a certain point and know where your cut is and where your camera's gonna come. It was a whole thing. And he left me that night with one of the most important lessons that he could share with me was that there must be raison d'etre. And I had never studied French. And I called my friend and I said, Greg, raisin bread. I think he said something like raisin bread. And thank God, Greg Smith said, raison d'être. It's the reason for being. And that what Gene was saying was, you know, have a reason. You know, have something at the core that excites you, that motivates you, that thrills you, and that gives you purpose and reason to do the work in the first place. He was awesome. He was awesome. I thought he was talking to me about breakfast cereal.
The most exciting was the 40s, 80s number that we did.
When I hit on this idea that we would physically bring the two together and then started presenting it to the production team, everyone got excited about how could we physically make it move, and then what would the look be? And then, of course, the musical transition, which was really a lot of fun, figuring out the two different sounds and then bringing them together. So it was challenging, but in a really good way.
I told him about the Tubes, and I just felt that the Tubes were the ultimate underground happening rock and roll band ahead of their time. And then on the other side, we went with the sort of big band. And that was my favorite sort of big number, and I really enjoyed the concept behind it.
We had to make something very contemporary and something very 40s. In the 80s, we tried to go almost futuristic and very sexy and stuff that wasn't used like it is today. That's where all the skin and all the bodysuits, and then the Tubes, make them neon orange, just so they would pop like crazy.
I know we used those costumes for a couple of years after. I remember wearing them in Europe, wearing orange, nylon orange suits. I remember how hot they were. Oh, I couldn't believe it. We went in and recorded the song, our song, and we hadn't really heard the 40s song, and we didn't really realize how the music kind of fit together, how it all synced up. I had no idea that that was going to work like that. And then when the two stages kind of merged together and kind of fit into one stage, I mean, it was amazing.
Kenny choreographed the 40s and Russell choreographed the 80s, right?
The 40s group and the 80s group, we didn't mingle too much. They kept us apart so that when the first day of shooting came in, it was a surprise to a lot of us. Wow, this is how we're blending together. And our dances weren't that far different. We just looked very different.
I love it! About 2 months into The Secret of NIMH, this was probably March of 1980, I get a frantic call from a Joel Silver. He says, I need to talk to you. We've got to get some animation done. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he says, I've got a song that I have not put in this movie, and it has to go in this movie, and I believe it should be done in animation.
He had taken the song, and he had gotten some footage somewhere of Alice in Wonderland. He had put it together with it, and he said, this works really, really well with animation. And I, we can't, we're doing a feature. You know, we're too busy, we can't do this. He said, well, yeah, I think you probably can, and here's how much I'm willing to pay you, and I'll pay you some more, too, and I'll pay you this, and whatever, do it. So we said, well, can we do this?
We scrambled. I mean, Don probably knocked out the 10-minute storyboard in 2 or 3 days, and we called Joel back the same week on a Friday, and Joel just jumped up and says, I love it, it works, let's do it, when can you start?
So I just started animating it, and the concept was pretty fun, actually. Didn't involve too much character development. It was just a lovely, lovely girl comes down and sees a lovely, lovely guy, and they turn themselves into several animals and go romping through some romantic moonlit night. I thought, well, that's right up my alley. To shoot the live action for the two mortals in the cartoon version, there was a really wonderful choreographer named Kenny Ortega.
I'm in that. I actually did that choreography. I'm underneath that character, which is kind of a fun thing to imagine. I wonder if you could erase it, if you would find me under there, you know?
Our attempt, as we went into different characters, the bird and the fish and everything, was to make it still seem like it was Olivia Newton-John. You know? And she wore the leg warmers because she was a muse and a dancer. So we said, well, let's just give her little earmarks that keep us, remind us that it is her, even though it has another form. And I remember sitting in the theater, and as it came up, my heart started to pound. I remember this, and it was pounding really, really hard, and I thought, oh, this is stupid. Why am I getting so excited? This is dumb. But I felt I was going to be laughed at. And then as this thing took off and it started to play, I remember bowing my head. I'd seen it, I thought, oh no, this is terrible, this is terrible. I just know it's terrible. And they didn't laugh, but I remember them cheering.
somebody said to me, create Xanadu, and at that time I looked around and that was the closest example that I could find.
We really wanted it to be as exciting as we could make it without it seeming like another movie. And that was always, some of the challenges, like you can't just go crazy, but to try to keep it within this movie. Fortunately, the rules of this movie were so flexible, you could do a huge amount of possibilities.
Just the massive amount of people just got the adrenaline going and everything. And I remember just saying, it's movie making. You never know how anything's going to turn out. But when you see it all come together in the editing, it really was fantastical.
I put Dizzy Heights, whirling above it all, and Gene Kelly out there skating around with the coolest kids on the block.
I just remember, there was this whole line of us, and juggling is not that hard, really, but we had to pass 2 or 3 revolutions, which is a little harder than just passing one. There was always, somebody who would drop one, and it'd be like, okay, Gene, let's start again. Okay, everybody, you guys ready? Okay, yeah, and then, then that person would be great, then someone else would drop one, so it took 20 takes, but finally, we roller skated through, and we're like, oh, thank God.
One of the things that really bugged Gene, and that's his word, was the fact that they cut his legs off. When he's roller skating, he's actually doing the skating himself. He did it all. He was a magnificent skater, both ice skating and roller skating, and had been since his youth in Pittsburgh. And when we ran the movie, it really drove him crazy.
The tightrope walking, I remember that being really scary because we were doing something really kind of hard. We had to kind of both put both feet on so that we could do the kiss to be worked out. And that was really hard. But the weird thing is that when I finally saw it, they filmed it from about here up. So really, we could have been a foot off the ground and it would have saved me all this, tension and anxiety.
Think about sometimes when you see that last number, Xanadu, and it's there's something about it, it mounts, it gets more over the top.
I do remember, going there every day and, mapping out all of the great musical changes. But I remember doing the transitions and the different costumes, and then figuring out the choreography, and then how we were going to shoot it.
You just kept sculpting and bringing in the different elements until you finally found there's no more money, there's no more time, and I can't find anything more, so okay, this is it.
My favorite review was, where else can you have Olivia Newton-John as a roller skating light bulb with rags around her ankles?
I wasn't so knowledgeable about the fact of grosses and how important all of that was. Again, it's the first film, and I didn't come from the film industry. And I do remember Tom Mount was the head of production under Ned Tannen. I do remember him calling me and saying, they love this movie in St. Louis. What I didn't know that meant was it's flopping everywhere else. But I didn't understand from a sort of career point of view what that meant at that time, and I subsequently learned.
This movie was supposed to open in around 900 theaters. And in fact, unbeknownst to me, it only opened in 200 and some odd theaters. Had it opened the way it was supposed to in a massive number of theaters, it would have been quite successful because the music was carrying us along. Magic was #1. We had other songs in the top 10. We just didn't have enough theaters.
Over time, I started getting letters from people and phone calls and people asking me if I had copies of a costume or could they get a roller skate. And then it started playing midnights at places, and then it worked its way back up where now I get emails from people swearing allegiance to the gods of Xanadu.
There are those people that really like the kitschy campiness of it. Then there are people who really love the movie.
Gradually, it got to be something that kind of got cool to say that you liked because you felt that you were part of this sort of elite group that sort of got it early.
But, now it just is, it's kind of like a time capsule of a time period that is sort of fun to watch again.
It all goes back to the music. And then over the years, it sort of built a cult following, which was nice.
People talk about it. They email us all the time about trying to get us to perform that song. We won't do it. We won't play it. But I'm sure this will spawn a whole other round of, well, how come you guys never play Got Some Dancing to Do? Well, how come?
All the critics have disparaged it. Everyone's written the worst about it. People have panned it. People love it.
So I go to this movie. It was Grauman's Chinese Theater, August 8th, 1980, and all over town there were these billboards and 8/8/80, and it was supposed to be this big, enormous thing.
I was 9 years old when Xanadu first came out. I immediately fell in love with it and saw it, I believe, a total of 9 times when it first came out.
And I found myself sort of like getting totally caught up. And at some point, this thing, like, it just got me. And I just loved it, and everybody was applauding at the end of every number. And
I just thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And I think underneath that campiness, there's an underlying genius.
Going from all my life wanting to be a filmmaker, this very, very stupid movie totally changed the course of what my career was going to be. But something about watching all those dancers sort of got to me. And then I sort of said, okay, I'm going to try my first dance class. And in a year and a half's time, I became professional. And it's just amazing. And I wish it were a more profound film that did that.
I've had my own screenings where we've had some of the original dancers come out, which is thrilling. Sometimes we'll dance along with the movie, kind of like Rocky Horror style, and it's a lot of fun. And I think it's great to have these screenings because it's a way for the fans to get together and express their love for the movie, where they know that there are other fans who understand the movie the way they do.
It's light, it's fluffy, it's fun. You don't have to think about all the bad things going on around you. You just escape into this ridiculous premise, crazy movie.
I think it does hold a place in our lexicon of movies now, you know? I mean, look what happened to Can't Stop the Music. But Xanadu,